She was only 12 when her voice became a joke in her own classroom. Each word she spoke, each syllable shaped by her roots, was met with laughter from the one person meant to protect her, her teacher. But what no one knew was that the same accent they mocked would one day echo through the halls of universities, printed on pages read around the world. This is not just a story about cruelty. It's about resilience, revenge, and the power of words. Because sometimes, the voice they try to silence becomes the one they can never ignore. Nova grew up in a small southern town where voices carried stories, thick with rhythm, history, and pride. Her mother worked 2 jobs but never missed a night reading aloud from old library books, her accent smooth and rooted in generations of strength. Nova loved words because they made her feel seen, even when the world refused to. Every morning she walked to school with her backpack slightly torn, a notebook tucked inside filled with poems no one had ever read. She dreamed of becoming a writer, of telling stories about girls who sounded like her, girls who didn't have to change to be accepted. But middle school wasn't kind to dreamers like Nova. The halls echoed with whispers that never stopped when she walked by. Her voice, soft but full of melody, became a target. "You sound funny," they'd say. She tried to ignore it, but one day the laughter didn't come from the kids. It came from the front of the classroom. Her English teacher, the one she admired most, chuckled after Nova read a paragraph aloud. The room went silent before the giggles started. The teacher's smirk told her everything. Her voice, her story, her identity didn't belong here. That moment changed something inside Nova. She stopped raising her hand. She started writing even more, only now her words carried fire instead of hope. Because deep down, she made a promise to herself that day. The same voice they mocked would one day be the reason they remembered her. The weeks after that humiliating moment changed everything for Nova. She spoke less, smiled less, and began to live in silence. A silence heavy enough to feel like punishment. The classroom, once her favorite place, became a battlefield she never asked to fight in. Each time her teacher called on her, she felt that same wave of heat crawl up her neck, the weight of dozens of eyes waiting for her to slip, to sound different. At home, she hid her pain well. Her mother thought the quiet meant maturity. But behind her bedroom door, Nova's world was made of scribbled notebooks, her only escape. The words poured out like survival. Stories of courage, anger, and freedom. Every insult became ink. Every laugh became fuel. Yet deep down, the wounds kept spreading, invisible but real. The school wasn't just silent about what happened. It encouraged it. When Nova finally gathered the courage to correct her teacher's pronunciation during a reading lesson, the class burst into laughter again. The teacher's smirk returned. "Maybe in your neighborhood that's how you say it," she said. The laughter that followed wasn't just cruel, it was approval. It told every kid in that room that it was okay to mock her voice. Word spread fast. In hallways, in lunch lines, in whispers. They mimicked her accent, twisted her name, called her grammar girl as a joke. The isolation grew louder than any insult. Yet Nova refused to cry in front of them. She saved every tear for the pages of her stories. She started writing before sunrise and long after midnight. Stories about girls who didn't have to beg to be heard, girls who turned pain into power. Then one day, something shifted. Her school announced an annual state writing competition, open to all students. Nova almost ignored it, convinced no one would ever take her words seriously. But one night, as she reread a story she had written about a young girl overcoming shame, she felt something stir inside. That story was her, raw, real, and unfiltered. For the first time, she didn't edit out her dialect or soften her tone. She wrote the way she spoke. Submitting that story felt like walking into the same classroom again, vulnerable and exposed. Days turned into weeks. When the results were finally posted, Nova wasn't expecting her name. But there it was, printed in bold, first place, Nova Jameson, the sound of home. The announcement spread through the school like wildfire. The same teacher who once mocked her now had to shake her hand during the assembly. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. Yet when she stepped on stage, Nova didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at her teacher. For the first time, her voice didn't tremble. She thanked her mother. She thanked her community. And then she paused. Most of all, she said, I want to thank every person who ever told me my voice didn't belong, because they made me realize how powerful it truly is. The audience erupted. But for Nova, it wasn't about applause. It was about reclaiming the one thing they tried to take from her: her voice. Winning that competition should have been the end of the story. The moment everything changed. But for Nova, it was only the beginning of something bigger and darker. The day after her win, the local paper featured her photo, smiling with her trophy. The headline read, "Local Girl Wins State Writing Contest." But the comments online told a different story. Beneath the praise were words that cut deep. She only won for diversity points. Probably didn't even write it herself. That accent of hers? Doesn't sound like a writer to me. Nova tried to ignore it, but in the hallways, the whispers returned. This time, colder, quieter, sharper. The teacher who once mocked her didn't congratulate her in person. Instead, she handed Nova a printed page and said, "We'll have to make sure this wasn't plagiarized." In that moment, the applause she'd earned turned to suspicion. The victory she'd dreamed of was now being questioned because of who she was, because of the voice she refused to hide. Nova stood frozen in front of the class, her story now on trial. She remembered every late night, every tear that had stained her notebook, every word born from pain, and realized that no amount of talent could protect her from prejudice that refused to die quietly. That night, she went home and sat at her desk, staring at the same old notebook where it all began. For a moment, she wanted to quit, to let them have their silence back. But then, she remembered her mother's voice. "They can mock your sound, but they can't own your story." She picked up her pen. The next page began with a single line that would change everything. "They laughed at my accent, but it was never broken, just unheard." It wasn't just writing anymore. It was rebellion written in ink years past. Nova grew up, but the sound of that laughter never completely faded. It only changed meaning. She turned her pain into purpose, her shame into strength. Every story she wrote became a mirror reflecting the truth of what it means to be judged before being understood. By 25, she had published her first book, a memoir titled The Sound of Home. It wasn't just a bestseller. It became a movement. Universities invited her to speak about the power of language and identity. Students lined up to tell her how her words gave them permission to love their own voices again. And one day, during a book signing in her old town, Nova looked up and saw a familiar face, her former teacher. The woman looked smaller somehow, humbled by time. She whispered, "I was wrong." Nova didn't answer with anger. She simply smiled and said, "I know." Because the truth didn't need revenge. It had already spoken for itself. That night, Nova walked past her old school, now repainted and modernized, but still echoing memories she'd never forget. She thought about every child sitting in those classrooms right now, afraid to speak, afraid to sound different. And she realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every voice ever silenced, every accent ever mocked, every name ever mispronounced with malice instead of respect. Racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it laughs. Sometimes it hides behind a smile or a joke that lingers too long. But the damage it causes lasts a lifetime. Nova's story reminds us that silence is a choice, and power begins the moment we stop apologizing for who we are. Because the truth is simple. The same voice they tried to shame became the one the world now celebrates. So ask yourself, how many voices have we laughed at, ignored, or dismissed without realizing we were silencing brilliance? Don't miss more powerful real-life stories. Hit subscribe now.